In Nigeria today, the struggle for political office is no longer fought at the ballot box. It is fought in courtrooms, and the courts have taken major political decisions in Nigeria. At the center of this battlefield stands the Supreme Court of Nigeria, the final arbiter of law, and increasingly the final decider of political power in Nigeria. From the People's Democratic Party to the African Democratic Congress, internal party disputes have escalated into constitutional crisis. But the real questions are this: are these rulings stabilizing Nigeria's democracy or quietly redefining them? In most claims, Supreme Court judgments settle all matters. Usually there are no ambiguity, no controversy, no differences in the interpretations of Supreme Court judgments. A sad development in Nigeria today is that Supreme Court judgments are now subject to different interpretations and differences in opinion as to what actually the Supreme Court has decided. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is The Other Side. What really did the Supreme Court decide last Thursday? The core issues before the court were disputes over party leadership legitimacy, candidate nomination processes, and internal party decisions that were challenged in court. The first decision the court took was that the court cannot interfere in the internal affairs of political parties. The second one was the recognition of party supremacy. Political parties retain primary authority over their leadership structure and their internal process. Courts cannot substitute party decisions with their own preferences. The third matter that came out of the Supreme Court was that pre-election matters must meet legal threshold. Only aspirants or persons directly affected have local standing. General party members cannot challenge internal decisions without legal standing. Fourth, candidate nomination is an internal party affair. The court will not impose candidates unless clear illegality is proven. The fifth is that due processes must be followed. So even breach the constitutions of the party, the courts can now intervene. In the case of the PDP, in the case of the African Democratic Congress, the key decisions were simple. The dispute before the court was disputes over leadership legitimacy, control of party structure, and competing claims by different groups. And the key decisions by the court was that the courts would not decide party leadership disputes unless legal rights are violated. The Supreme Court emphasized that leadership tussles are primarily internal affairs of the party. The courts only intervene where legal rights or statutory provisions are breached. Secondly, the court also recognized valid party processes where a faction can demonstrate compliance with party constitution proper procedures. That faction gains legal recognition. And it also rejected judicial imposition of leadership. The court refused to install or remove party leadership arbitrarily. Leadership, according to the court, must emerge through party mechanism. And of course, the issue of local standing came up again. Only individuals directly affected or with demonstrable legal injury can bring actions to court. And the annex role was reduced to the following as enshrined in the Constitution. It cannot decide party leadership disputes and must rely on valid party submissions or court rulings. And so the cross-cutting feature of the decisions of the court, the reaffirmation of party autonomy, political parties control their internal affairs. It also limited judicial interventions. Courts can only intervene when the Constitution is violated or the Electoral Act is breached. And then third, only persons directly affected can sue. So these were the key decisions of the Supreme Court. But how did we arrive at this point that the courts are becoming so strong in deciding the affairs of political parties? Let's take a look at the People's Democratic Party. To understand today's battles, you must go back because the crisis within the PDP did not begin in court. The 2015 collapse was the 2015 collapse of the PDP that manifested itself in the loss of the 2015 election was just not because of election. It was because of internal political fracture. Before the 2015 election, the PDP had not been defeated by any opposition party, whether combined as it happened in 1999 or other parties standing alone. It was weakened from within, and the key triggers included several factors, including the following. The G7 governors' rebellion, where influential party governors broke ranks with the party because they did not want President Goodluck Jonathan, and they were joined by prominent politicians, including the former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, whose major argument was that it was the turn of the North to rule Nigeria, and that President Goodluck Jonathan should not have sought for the party's ticket to run the election. These disputes and growing dissatisfaction with President Goodluck Jonathan created the fragmentation within the party that led to its defeat. At the core of it was the issue of zoning, or rotation of power, as we know, is an informal but powerful agreement to rotate power between northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria. After the death of President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, power shifted automatically to the south to President Goodluck Jonathan, who was then the vice president. Even though there were debates, there were arguments in several parts of the country, especially in the north, that President Goodluck Jonathan should not have sought for even the 2011 elections. He should have ceded it to the north. And President Goodluck contested that election, and his main rival was Vice President Atiku Abubakar, who lost the primaries to President Goodluck Jonathan. Even then, the politicians from the north, largely including those in the PDP, rallied around President Muhammadu Buhari, then General Muhammadu Buhari, to create what they call consensus northern candidate. In the election result that followed, President Goodluck Jonathan defeated Muhammadu Buhari and became president. Of course, northern elites felt shortchanged. Trust within the party began to erode, and zoning became a source of conflict rather than source of balance. The result of it was that by 2012, 2013, and 2014, starting from the protests, mass protests against the withdrawal of fuel subsidy and the agitations that power should return to the north, and the expectations and perception and reality that President Goodluck Jonathan was seeking for a re-election in 2015. Critical stakeholders in the north, in the south, left the PDP, more with President Muhammadu Buhari's CPC and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's ACN to form what they call APC, and the PDP was defeated. President Muhammadu Buhari remained in power for 8 years. The attempt of Vice President Atiku Abubakar to defeat him from within the APC failed in 2015, and in 2019, Vice President Atiku Abubakar got back to the PDP, got the presidential ticket, and did not defeat President Muhammadu Buhari. And then came the 2023 election. Crisis returned again. By 2023, the same unresolved issues surfaced. At the center of it again was Vice President Atiku Abubakar. And the question was, should power return to the north? The PDP decided to give its ticket to a northerner, Vice President Atiku Abubakar, while the APC gave its ticket to a southerner, that is President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Of course, when Atiku Abubakar emerged as PDP's presidential candidate, the expectation was clear: balance the ticket. Well, the decision was different. Instead of selecting Nyesom Wike, who ran against him as a presidential candidate, the vice president chose the former governor of Delta State, Dr. Ifeanyi Okowa. And the fallout was expected. Wike and his allies felt politically sidelined, and a powerful internal bloc emerged, that is the G5 governors. Remember 2015, when there was the G7 PDP governors who rebelled against President Goodluck Jonathan. This time we had 5 governors rebelling against the Vice President Atiku Abubakar. The unity collapsed at a critical moment. The PDP entered the 2023 election divided at the top, fragmented at the state level, and unable to present a unified front. The conclusion was obvious: the party could not win the elections. If the PDP crisis reflects a long internal struggle, the divisions inside the African Democratic Congress, ADC, reveals something else. how smaller parties became battlegrounds for larger political strategies. Unlike the PDP, the ADC's crisis is not rooted in decades of power struggles. It is shaped by weak institutional structures, competing leadership claims, and external political influence. And of course, there is the controversial issue of the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Olufemi Hakim Gbajabiamila, who, according to videos circulating online, Aji gave a directive to Honorable Leke Abijide that he should maintain the internal divisions within the ADC. Of course, Ajibade has since left the ADC and decamped to the All Progressive Congress. But why does this matter? Indeed, the implications for this are profound. It suggests that the internal crises within the party are not always organic. They may be politically engineered, strategically sustained, or used to weaken opposition capacity. It is important, whether proven or not, the perception alone has consequences. It deepens distrust within the ADC, reinforces factional paranoia, and weakens party cohesion ahead of elections. This reflects a recurring feature in Nigerian politics. Smaller parties are not always independent. They can become, or really are, extensions of larger political parties, tools in elite power competition, or even platforms weakened from within before elections begin. In this environment, the crisis within the ADC is not just about leadership. It is about whether political competition itself is being quietly shaped behind the scenes from outside. When these disputes reached the Supreme Court of Nigeria, the doctrine was clear. Parties are autonomous, but they are not above the law. The court does not run parties. The courts enforce constitutional compliance and the Electoral Act. Interventions happen only when legal thresholds are crossed. Of course, the rulings by the Supreme Court did not end the crisis or the controversies. The judgment seemed only to have intensified the controversy. The PDP aftermath witnessed contradictory statements by parties that went to court. And in the case of the ADC, there are parallel leadership interpretations and continuing fragmentation, only helped now by the decamping of some of the actors from the ADC to other parties. And court rulings in Nigeria do not actually end disputes. They just relocate them. These are not really disagreements. They are competing systems of authority. Across Nigeria, internal party disputes are now legal battles. The PDP, the Labour Party, All Progressive Congress, and so many other cases are in courts, some so small or too few or not well publicized. Only a few days ago, the Attorney General of the Federation brought in a new dimension to the whole crisis in Nigeria's politics. The Attorney General is pushing for the deregistration of political parties, asking the courts to compel the INEC to delist some parties, including the ADC, from the register of registered political parties. Is this, again, reform or part of the process to consolidate power and remove competition from Nigeria's political space? 2027 may be shaped before voting begins. It's very possible that there may be just one or two major political parties on the ballot paper. It is just possible that other political parties that may be on the ballot paper may just be proxies for other political groups. Legally, of course, the courts are within their mandate. But politically, something is changing, something is emerging. And what is emerging is not strengthening the institutions of democracy, but weakening them. If this continues, Nigeria's democracy may not collapse, but it may transform from a system decided by voters to a system shaped by courts, and a court system that is perceived not to be free from control by forces that control the Nigerian state. My name is Rimamnde Shawulu. This is The Other Side. Please subscribe to The Other Side for deep, evidence-based analysis on Nigeria's politics, law, and power.